Today, we're going to cover vibrato, ladies and gentlemen. And with this video, I want to hit 3 big points, which is going to be lip vibrato or jaw, throat vibrato, and then body, that which comes from like down here, like a flute player or a vocalist would use. All right, so let's get to it. Let's start with the most common, which is going to be lip or jaw vibrato. Now, before we go into this, I want to explain this difficulty that a saxophone has when using vibrato, or any other type of inflection for that matter. But when we play a pitch on a saxophone, we have very little adjustment to pitch that note sharp using our embouchure. And we have a whole lot that we can do to pitch it flat with our embouchure. Now, because of that, I always advise people when they tune up to tune it a little tiny bit sharp so you can use your embouchure to center the pitch in tune. Because we don't have very much sharp that we can offer, we want to be able to just give it a little bit more so we have a little bit more sharp to play with. In order to do that, we need to center the pitch with a more relaxed embouchure. So that way it just gives us more flexibility on the sharp end. And we have what is ultimately a balanced vibrato. All right, let's continue. I would advise you, yes, practice this with a metronome. Just quarter note equals whatever. Make sure that it's slow, and then vary how many waves of the vibrato that you have per minute, like 60 beats per minute. I'm just gonna pick the tempo off my head. All right, I think it's a good idea when you're first starting to learn vibrato to practice it with a metronome. However, I don't feel like it's a great idea. Now, you definitely want to start exercising with consistency, but you don't want to get locked into being mechanized when you use your vibrato. So I think the best way to really get started with really hearing vibrato and keeping yourself musical with using it is to just start with a really simple song, something like 3 Blind Mice, and then pick a note you want to use vibrato on, and then pick a speed like this. Okay, notice how I'm varying the speed when I want to be more intense. And then it's like I'm using a slower vibrato as a point of resolution. So it just brings us back to tension and release. More tension, faster vibrato. Release, slower vibrato. Or check this out. Okay? Next. It really annoys me when people just use vibrato for the sake of vibrato and it's just wavy and doesn't make any sense. Like, people don't really play like that. And usually, and this is a huge point, is that the speed of the vibrato carries more emotion than the size of the vibrato. When you listen to a lot of pop music and whatnot, you hear something that'll sound like this, and it makes a very, very definitive statement. Check this out. So you can use varying speeds of vibrato in order to convey the kind of emotion that you want. Now, how do you know what kind of speed of vibrato is conveying what type of emotion? You just have to listen to people that play. Now, I'm going to give you a list of some people that I think are easily identifiable by their vibrato. One of which, David Sanborn, Kenny G, Marcel Mule, Sidney Bechet, just to name a few. If you listen to them, you instantly know whether it's the actual person or if it's some kind of clone, because their vibrato is so distinctive. And you always want to be focusing on making musical statements with your vibrato. All right, so let's talk about the actual jaw movement, which is basically just an up and down movement against the reed to give it this modulation. With the throat vibrato, it's really more of a tongue vibrato. I call it throat because it's just a lot easier to understand it, but it's really more of just a ya 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 manipulation of the airstream, where the body is more of like a deep like a I'm using just this lower part of my body to manipulate the airflow. Now, I know people want to talk about diaphragm and whether you're using lung or anything like that. Don't even worry about that kind of stuff. This body support is not exactly what I'm using for flute because I have this obstruction of the saxophone mouthpiece in the way. But just that body vibrato is really coming from using that wall from the lower part of the body. All right, let's continue. Now, I'm also a flute player, and you cannot use this kind of vibrato on flute. This has to come from what I call body vibrato. And you can apply this technique to saxophone, which is what I'm going to show you right now. Check this out. Now, this can really cause a lot of disturbance throughout the entire saxophone. You can engage this shaking motion of the saxophone. I usually use this in really extreme cases and just to really change things up. So I'll switch from a jaw vibrato to a body vibrato. That shaking motion, I'm like really engaging that lower part. It's more of an effect, but it can be very useful if you get really good at it and use it efficiently. But it is very uncommon to do that on a saxophone. And then another vibrato can come from here. Okay, let me do some playing examples for you so that way you can understand what I'm talking about. Check this out. Where I'm thinking more here than I am here. Okay, when I'm playing up there, it's all mostly a lot of throat that I'm using to vary that pitch. In the world of classical saxophone, you need to be very particular about how you are using vibrato. So let's say, for instance, you have a sonata that has 3 parts. Usually the first part is some type of peppy part. The second one, some type of ballad, slow part. The third one, some type of triumphant ender. Now, according to the style, that's how you want to shape your vibrato. Because vibrato inherently just carries a lot of emotion, you want to keep your vibrato consistent with the emotional context of the movement. So if the first one is like a light peppy thing, you want to have like a relatively fast and consistent vibrato throughout that entire first movement. Unless, of course, there's some type of stylistic change in that movement. Then you can switch to a different speed of vibrato. If you just start randomly switching the speeds of vibrato in classical saxophone music, you're really starting to tell your listeners something very different from what the composer had in mind. So keep that in mind when you're playing classical saxophone. Here's a tiny little clip of me doing something, so enjoy. Another one, and I'm going to finish with this one, is actually the lack of vibrato. Once you've been using it, can make a very, very powerful statement. Listen to this clip where I'm really just focusing on tone and timbre, and I'm using very, very little vibrato. Okay, so when we don't use any vibrato at all, and then we use vibrato, it can send a very, very powerful statement. Listen to how I vary where I use the vibrato in a melodic phrase. Here's an exercise that I want you guys to practice. It's a blues scale, and it's almost 2 octaves. You play it from the high octave down, and then you play down again, but before you get to the last note, go up a half step. So it should sound like this. On the first note, I want you to use a really fast vibrato. And on the last note, that resolution, use a really slow vibrato and really milk that slow vibrato. So get creative with it, like something like that. So that way you're just always thinking about varying the speeds. Just take a ballad, whatever one you like the most, and just get creative with it. And I cannot stress enough how important it is to listen to players that you like, and then just isolate what they're doing with their vibrato. And don't forget to listen to when they're not using vibrato. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's all I got for you. I'm going to keep these videos coming, so thanks for tuning in. See ya!